Hello, this is Chris Wilhelm, and for the next hour, I'll be reading from the Friday, December 26th issue of the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Trump tosses lifelines to the struggling coal industry. The Energy Department ordered 2 coal-burning power plants to remain open, and the Environmental Protection Agency gave utilities more time to tackle toxic coal ash. By Lisa Friedman and Maxine Joselo. A day after the Trump administration acted to throttle offshore wind farms, it tossed 2 lifelines to coal, the dirtiest fossil fuel and a favored industry of the president. The government ordered 2 coal-burning power plants in Indiana to continue operating past their scheduled closure dates, while it also gave hundreds of coal plants an additional 5 years before they need to prevent toxic chemicals from leaching into sources of drinking water. The dual moves laid on Tuesday were part of the administration's sweeping effort to bolster the struggling coal industry and avoid having coal plants close on President Trump's watch. The day before, the Trump administration had dealt a devastating blow to clean energy by ordering the suspension of 5 offshore wind projects that were under construction along the East Coast and poised to deliver power to more than 2.5 million homes and businesses. Clearly, this is a full-throttle attempt to help the fossil fuel industry and to hamper renewable energy, said Sonia Carli, the director of the Kleinman Center for Energy Policy at the University of Pennsylvania. Burning coal produces more planet-warming carbon dioxide than any other form of energy. It also emits mercury, a powerful neurotoxin, and other heavy metals. While coal plants once generated nearly half of America's electricity, they produced just 16% last year. Hundreds of coal units have retired since the mid-2000s as utilities switched to cheaper natural gas plants and wind and solar power. Mr. Trump has been intent on reviving what he calls beautiful clean coal. In a series of steps aimed at improving the economics of coal, the administration has opened more federal lands to coal mining, reduced the royalty rates that companies must pay the government to extract coal from public lands, offered $625 million in grants to upgrade coal plants, and loosened limits on their emissions. Forcing these power plants to stay open is propping up the industry, and it will likely lead to a small increase in mining and production. But long-term, the trends are that coal is significantly more expensive than other alternatives, Dr. Carli said. On Tuesday evening, the Energy Department ordered the 2 coal plants in Indiana to continue running through March 23, 2026. The 2 utilities that own the plants were planning to shutter them by December 31st. Chris Wright, the Energy Secretary, said that the closures would leave the region without enough power this winter, a claim disputed by some energy experts. The Trump administration remains committed to swiftly deploying all available tools and authorities to safeguard the reliability, affordability, and security of the nation's energy system, Mr. Wright said in a statement. Keeping these coal plants online has the potential to save lives and is just common sense. Dr. Carli noted that the utilities had plans in place to produce electricity without the coal plants. She also said that the extra costs of keeping the plants running would be borne by Indiana homes and businesses. It means that all Indiana ratepayers, those who are consuming energy, will pay significantly more for their energy than had the plants closed, she said. One of Mr. Wright's orders will affect an aging coal-powered unit at the F.B. Cully Generating Station in Warwick County, Indiana. CenterPoint Energy, the operator of the plant, had predicted that the retirement of this unit and one other would save its customers $80 million on their electric bills over the next 20 years. Mr. Wright also ordered the 2 remaining coal-burning units at Schaffer Generating Station in Wheatfield, Indiana, to keep operating. The owner, Northern Indiana Public Service Company, had intended to close the units as part of a broader plan to pursue more natural gas, wind, and solar power in addition to battery storage. Mike Roeder, the president of CenterPoint Energy Indiana, said in a statement that the utility would comply with the order and continue to work collaboratively with the administration. Working together, we will help contribute to regional electric reliability efforts to focus on what is most important, safe and reliable service for our customers and fellow Hoosiers during the upcoming winter months, he said. Jessica Cantarelli, a spokeswoman for Northern Indiana Public Service Company, said in an email that the utility was carefully reviewing the details of this order to determine its effects on customers and employees. While this development alters the timeline for decommissioning this station, our long-term plan to transition to a more sustainable energy future remains unchanged, Ms. Cantarelli said. Since Mr. Trump returned to office in January, the Energy Department has ordered several other coal plants in Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Washington state to stay open 90 days past their scheduled retirement dates. The agency later extended some of these orders after they had expired. In an earnings report, the majority owner of the coal plant in Michigan estimated that it cost more than $80 million to comply with the orders between May 23rd and September 30th, or more than $615,000 per day. Michelle Bloodworth, the president of America's Power, a coal industry trade group, said that Mr. Wright made the right call. She said that studies have shown parts of the power grid risk shortages during the winter. Maintaining a diverse set of fuel resources, including coal, is critical to ensuring electric reliability, especially during winter storms and other extreme weather events, she said in a statement. Also on Tuesday, the Environmental Protection Agency finalized a regulation delaying standards aimed at limiting the leaching of heavy metals like arsenic, lead, and mercury into water supplies from coal ash dump sites. Coal ash, the residue produced from burning coal, was dumped for years in unlined ponds, landfills, and mines where toxic pollution could leak into water and soil. The federal government began to tighten regulations after spills in North Carolina and Tennessee sent mercury, cadmium, arsenic, and other heavy metals from the ash into water supplies. The Biden administration had ordered coal plants that intended to continue operating through the 2030s to begin meeting strict wastewater standards no later than 2029. The Trump administration called those deadlines unworkable and gave utilities 5 more years to comply. The action would strengthen America's position as the AI capital of the world while bolstering industrial competitiveness, the EPA said in a fact sheet. A boom in the construction of power-hungry data centers for the artificial intelligence industry is driving up electricity demand. Thomas Smar, an attorney with Earth Justice, an environmental law firm, said the delay could result in an increase in cancer, cardiovascular disease, and other health issues linked to coal ash discharges. It means that the 3 million people who still rely on drinking water that's found to be contaminated by coal ash wastewater discharges will have rivers and lakes and streams not cleaned up, he said. Ms. Bloodworth of the coal lobby said the industry wants the EPA to eliminate the wastewater standards entirely. Complying with them would be so costly as to drive some power plants to close, she said. As AI companies borrow billions, debt investors grow wary. Artificial intelligence companies looking to raise funds are being made to pay lofty interest rates as debt investors become cautious. By Joe Rennison. Investors in the AI-fueled stock market have largely shrugged off warnings about a tech bubble, an optimism that has pushed up share prices to repeated new highs this year. But the debt market is telling a different story, some investors say. New artificial intelligence companies looking to raise funds to supercharge their nascent businesses are being made to pay lofty interest rates on the money they borrow, indicative of investors' skepticism when new, unproven AI businesses take on large debts. In one debt deal for Applied Digital, a data center builder, the company had to pay as much as 3.75 percentage points above similarly rated companies, equivalent to roughly 70% more in interest. There are other indicators of debt investors' wariness. Some of the bonds have tumbled in price after being issued, in a sign of increased caution among investors. And the cost of credit default swaps, which protect bond investors from losses, has surged in recent months on some AI companies' debt. Construction delays at these sprawling data facilities could push out the time it takes before they can start generating revenue from their leases to AI companies. Investors also worry that in the end there could be less demand for AI computing power, creating a glut of unneeded data centers and leading to defaults on the debt used to finance the buildings. We just have to be much more pessimistic and not buy into the hype, said Will Smith, a portfolio manager at AllianceBernstein. Debt investors are stereotypically seen as pessimists, while stock investors are viewed as optimists. That is largely because of the difference between the two types of investments. Equity investors have unlimited upside for a company and its stock price to grow and keep rewarding their investment. Debt investors are just looking to get their money back with interest. The equity market stands to benefit from a lot of upside if this works well, so they are willing to take a lot of risk because of the upside, Mr. Smith said. For us, it's different. If everything goes really well, we don't benefit from that upside, so we are much more focused on the downside. Companies looking to finance the next leg of AI infrastructure have borrowed more than $100 billion this year, according to data from Refinitiv. Much of that has come from highly rated, well-known technology companies that are also sitting on a lot of cash. For example, Amazon raised $15 billion at market rates in November as it ramped up its capital investment in Amazon Web Services. But there have also been billions raised by some much smaller, newer companies that have had to pay up for the privilege. In mid-October, Wolf Compute, a subsidiary of TeraWulf, raised $3.2 billion through the corporate bond market. TeraWulf, which counts Gwyneth Paltrow as an early investor, became a public company in 2021 as a Bitcoin miner and has since expanded into building data centers. Wolf Compute is on the hook to pay investors 7.75% until the deal comes due in 2030. That's much higher than the average yield for similarly rated issuers, which is around 5.5% based on an index run by ICE Data Services. In a similar deal, Cipher Compute, a subsidiary of Cipher Mining, sold $1.7 billion of debt in early November, with a similar rating to Wolf Compute and at a similar coupon of just over 7%, still markedly higher than comparable bonds in other sectors. If you can get through the construction risk, these companies look stable with regular cash flows, said Naveen Sarma, who leads U.S. media and telecoms ratings at S&P Global. But you have to navigate through the construction risk. The smaller companies bringing debt deals have been either data center builders or renters like CoreWeave, which rents the data centers and put in the high-powered computer systems to then run large AI models for hyperscalers like OpenAI and Meta. Leaning on these contracts with bigger, more stable companies has allowed the newer entrants to the market to obtain middling credit ratings, despite their own lack of a proven profitable business. Like Wolf, Applied Digital, which builds data centers, received a BB credit rating when it sold $2.35 billion of debt in November. BB sits roughly in the middle of a ratings range that runs from AAA down to CCC. The debt sold with an even higher coupon of 9.25%, suggesting investors viewed the deal as riskier than Wolf Compute's. Applied Digital is heavily dependent on CoreWeave as its main tenant. CoreWeave then rents its computing power to the hyperscalers to run their AI models, and has big contracts with Meta, OpenAI, and Microsoft, to name a few. This dependency on just a few large customers has worried investors and rating agencies. CoreWeave raised $1.75 billion in July, receiving a lower assessment from the rating agencies of single B, signaling to investors that there was more risk to the deal. Unlike the data center builders that pledged the building as collateral to investors, CoreWeave borrowed money unsecured, which is inherently more risky. The deal came with a coupon of 9%. The company's shares were listed on the stock market in March, rising over 350% to its peak in June before steadily falling. The stock remains 70% higher this year, while the bonds have lost value since they were issued and are trading around 90 cents on the dollar. That drop in value has increased the overall yield of the bonds. The yield is the amount an investor would expect to receive over the life of the bonds, assuming all the debt is repaid at its original face value. The yield on CoreWeave's debt is now above 12%, indicative of what the company would have to pay as a coupon if the deal were brought to the market today. The average single B company trades with a yield of less than 7%. If things do crack, where are those things going to show up in the economy? Said Mr. Sarma at S&P. It won't wipe out Meta, but it could hurt a CoreWeave. The yield on Applied Digital's bonds has also risen to over 10%. In contrast, the implied borrowing costs for Cipher Compute and Wolf Compute have fallen, meaning the value of their debt has risen in recent weeks. Some investors said this showed the shift in market sentiment over time, with previous deals from the likes of CoreWeave being repriced lower by the market more recently, while newer deals have been priced in line with current expectations. As concerns in debt markets have risen, equity markets have also responded, and there has been a sharp pullback in recent months, especially among more speculative AI companies. The debt markets, like the equity markets, have been moving with sentiment, said K.C. Baer, a co-founder of the fund manager CKC Capital. To some extent, I think they have been driving sentiment. The equity sell-off came as more companies turned to debt markets to fund accelerated AI plans. When Oracle, which has $100 billion of outstanding debt, borrowed cash in September, it set up a sharp reassessment of the amount of money being bet on an uncertain future. The cost of buying Oracle credit default swaps, which protect bond investors from losses, has surged higher since then. The market is just trying to weigh different possibilities in a market that is very uncertain, Mr. Baer said. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Can Democrats reinvent themselves as Washington disruptors? Since President Trump's rise, Democrats have served as defenders of a political system many Americans believe is broken. Now the party is trying a new approach. By Lisa Lurer. All year, top Democrats have shown a striking awareness of one of their biggest problems. The party, Senator Chris Van Hollen of Maryland told NPR this month, needs to show how it will shake up the status quo. Embrace change, Senator Elissa Slotkin of Michigan urged on The Daily Show in May. The Democratic Party should be leading rather than just saying, no, 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 status quo, status quo. We have become the party of the status quo when we're not, Senator Chris Murphy of Connecticut told NBC News in March. As they try to repair their political brand before the midterm elections, Democrats are rushing to redefine themselves as Washington disruptors, eager to challenge a government that many Americans believe has failed to improve their lives. For years, Democratic leaders have cast their party as a firewall against the threats to American democracy they argue are posed by President Trump and his political movement. With their fierce opposition to Mr. Trump, Democrats have become the party of institutional preservation, championing political norms, expertise, and the role of the federal government. But with Republicans now in control of Washington, many Democratic politicians are trying to revamp their image with promises to upend existing power structures, whether they are the Trump administration, Congress, or even their own party orthodoxy. It is a message for an electorate that barely trusts government, politicians, or Washington to accomplish any change at all. I took on the powerful and corrupt Democrats, Mayor Paige Cognetti of Scranton, a Democrat running for a swing House seat in northeastern Pennsylvania, said in a video announcing her run that was widely praised across her party. We can stand tall against a Washington that takes advantage of working people. But changing the party's image won't be easy for Democrats. For much of the past year, they have fiercely opposed efforts by the Trump administration to drastically cut the size of the federal government. They have protested the shuttering of agencies like the U.S. Agency for International Development, defended federal workers, and backed lawsuits filed by federal unions and advocacy groups. Democrats know that those actions have affected how voters view their party. In the spring, congressional lawmakers were briefed in private meetings on polling by Navigator Research, a progressive public opinion firm, showing that a majority of voters described Democrats as focused on preserving the way government works, while only 20% said the same of Republicans, according to slides of the presentation given to the New York Times. The challenge Democrats face is how to simultaneously defend government institutions that Mr. Trump is trying to gut, while also offering a forward-looking message that resonates with voters who believe politics and democracy are broken. We have to embrace the need for change and reform. At the same time, I'm not interested in throwing the baby out with the bathwater, said Representative Jason Crow of Colorado, a Democrat chosen by his party's House campaign arm to recruit candidates. We end programs that aren't working, we reform agencies that are not delivering, and then we preserve those that are. Representative Ro Khanna, a Democrat from California who was trying to position himself as a leader of his party, said Democrats need to do more than simply oppose Mr. Trump to restore the trust and support of voters. We can't start with just, we want to return to normalcy, he said. What we need is a vision for change and holding elites accountable that is consistent with our values and our Constitution, and that we have a positive vision of building things up, not just a negative vision of tearing things down. What that vision is exactly remains unclear. Deep divisions on policy issues, including taxes and the role of money in politics, are already dividing the party in increasingly contentious primary races across the country. Many Democratic candidates believe they will connect with voters better if they start by acknowledging that government, including their own party, has not always worked. The problem is that many of those candidates have been part of state and federal government for years. In Minnesota, both Democrats competing for the state's open Senate seat have cast themselves as independent-minded fighters eager to upend the status quo. Representative Angie Craig, a four-term centrist Democrat from Minnesota, points to her successful challenge of Representative David Scott, 80, a Democrat from Georgia with far more seniority in the House, to become the ranking member of the House Agriculture Committee. In a party that seems obsessed with seniority, I'm willing to get out of line and challenge the status quo, she said as she announced her Senate bid. At the same time, Lieutenant Governor Peggy Flanagan, who won election to the Minnesota House a decade ago, is positioning herself in her Senate bid as a progressive fighter who is serious about taking on the status quo. Will we send Washington the same old people and the same old solutions, or will we be bolder and fight harder and get more done? She asked at a campaign event at a Minneapolis brewery this fall. Those messages are meant to resonate with voters who are not only disenchanted with government, but also deeply pessimistic about its ability to accomplish much of anything at all. Just 33% of American voters say they believe the country is capable of overcoming its deep divisions, according to a poll this fall from the Times and Siena University. That represented a remarkable decline from September 2020, when Americans were divided over the coronavirus pandemic and grappling with questions about racial inequality, but a majority of voters still said the country could solve its political problems. In some ways, the anti-establishment energy within the Democratic Party is reminiscent of the Tea Party movement, in which conservative activists channeled outrage over bank bailouts and right-wing animosity toward President Barack Obama into a wave of 2010 midterm victories. But while the Tea Party wanted to sharply limit, if not eliminate, the federal government, the current Democratic candidates see the solution as improving government, said Jesse Ferguson, a Democratic strategist. The Tea Party was against the status quo and for replacing it with nihilism, he argued. These candidates are against the status quo and for replacing it with something better. But targeted and calculated governmental change isn't exactly easy to explain or fit on a campaign bumper sticker. Pete Buttigieg, the former presidential candidate and transportation secretary under President Joseph R. Biden Jr., has acknowledged as much. It is wrong to burn down the Department of Education, but I actually think it's also wrong to suppose that the Department of Education was just right in 2024, he told NPR this summer. It's also wrong to suppose that if Democrats come back to power, our project should be to just tape the pieces together just the way that they were. We should be unsentimental about things that don't work. We should be fearless in defending the things that do work. Some strategists say embracing sweep-the-bums-out feeling matters more than exact policy prescriptions or plans for various government agencies. It's important to be anti-status quo right now because people hate politics. They hate politicians. They hate both parties. said Liz Smith, a Democratic strategist who worked on Mr. Buttigieg's 2020 campaign. Anyone who's part of it has to go. On Christmas, Pope Leo tells world's leaders to talk rather than make war. Leo XIV's Christmas address was his first since being elected pontiff and was scrutinized for comparisons with those of his predecessor, Francis. By Motoko Rich. Pope Leo XIV on Thursday used his first Christmas message as pontiff to call for peace and consolation for the victims of all current wars in the world, as well as for those suffering from injustice, political instability, religious persecution, and terrorism. Leo echoed many of the concerns of his predecessor, Pope Francis, urging protection for refugees, victims of climate disasters, the unemployed, and the exploited. Leo called for dialogue in Latin America amid an escalating U.S. naval campaign there and for better care for migrants who traverse the American continent. And he pushed for respectful dialogue in Europe as leaders seek peace in Ukraine. Leo, speaking from the same central balcony of St. Peter's Basilica where he appeared after being elected Pope in May, also urged his audience to embrace a strong sense of personal responsibility. If all of us at every level would stop accusing others and instead acknowledge our own faults, asking God for forgiveness, and if we would truly enter into the suffering of others and stand in solidarity with the weak and the oppressed, then the world would change, he said. As with all his public utterances, Leo's use of his influential pulpit was watched closely for comparisons with Francis, who died in April at the age of 88. As the first pontiff from the United States, Leo was also being scrutinized for how he related to his home country and its role as a global superpower. Francis was a gregarious presence on the world stage, often tangling directly with those he believed had strayed from Roman Catholic principles. He was unafraid to openly criticize the policies of President Trump and drew fierce opposition from some American Catholics who identified as conservative. By temperament, the new pope is more prudent and deliberate than Francis, analysts say, even as Leo has also challenged some of Mr. Trump's policies and views. In his Christmas address, speaking to thousands gathered in the square below him in drizzling rain, Leo did not call out specific global leaders by name. But amid the Trump administration's naval campaign off the Venezuelan coast, Leo said he hoped that those in Latin America who hold political responsibilities would find the space to engage in dialogue for the common good, rather than to ideological and partisan prejudices. Leo also echoed Francis's concerns about those most affected by the ravages of climate change, particularly those in South Asia and Oceania, who have been severely tested by recent devastating natural disasters that have struck entire communities. Leo said that as Christians celebrated the birth of Jesus, they should remember he accepted poverty and rejection, identifying himself with those who are discarded and excluded. Earlier Thursday, during a Christmas Mass in St. Peter's Basilica, the Pope urged the crowd gathered inside not to turn away from the tents in Gaza, exposed for weeks to rain, wind, and cold, and of those of so many other refugees and displaced persons on every continent, or of the makeshift shelters of thousands of homeless people in our own cities. Leo spoke as war continues in Ukraine and a ceasefire remains out of reach. On Tuesday, the Pope had told journalists that he felt great sadness because apparently Russia refused the request for a Christmas ceasefire. The Pope's comments during Christmas week reflect a delicate balancing act, analysts said. He's been trying to weigh carefully how much does he lean in on decisions taken by American politicians, said Nicholas Hayes Mota, a social ethicist and political theologian at Santa Clara University in California. Despite points of tension between Mr. Trump's agenda and Leo's positions on migration, on protection of the environment, and on collaboration between nations, the Pope does not want to be read simply as an anti-Trump or a voice of opposition, Mr. Hayes Mota said. Although Leo started his papacy more circumspectly, he has recently become more outspoken on issues that cross into politics. In October, during a private meeting with a group of Catholics from El Paso, Texas, the Pope urged American bishops to strongly support immigrants as Mr. Trump escalated his deportation campaign. A month later, Roman Catholic bishops in the United States issued a strong statement opposing the Trump administration's indiscriminate mass deportation campaign. This week, Leo weighed in on political decisions in his home state when he expressed disappointment that Governor J.B. Pritzker of Illinois, a Democrat, had signed a law allowing the terminally ill to end their lives with the assistance of physicians. Among foreign critics who view Mr. Trump as an unpredictable player on the world stage, many are looking to the Pope for an alternative American voice. Europeans, whose leaders have watched with dismay as Mr. Trump has openly denigrated longtime allies, have expectations for this Pope from the United States to say something on where the Vatican stands on this radical restructuring of transatlantic relations, said Massimo Fagioli, a professor of theology at Trinity College Dublin. Leo has started to show his hand. This month, when the Trump administration appeared to exclude Europe from negotiations for a peace plan for Ukraine, the Pope made remarks to reporters suggesting that he did not approve. Seeking a peace agreement without including Europe in the conversation, let's say, is not realistic, he said. He also seemed to address Mr. Trump's derision of Europe, warning against trying to break apart what I think needs to be a very important alliance today and in the future. And in his Christmas speech, Leo prayed that the parties involved, with the support and commitment of the international community, find the courage to engage in sincere, direct, and respectful dialogue in negotiations for peace in Ukraine. Maybe I am overinterpreting this, Professor Fagioli said, but I think it's a subtle message to the Trump administration and their envoys. Within the Vatican, Leo has taken a more congenial approach. In his first Christmas message to the leaders of the Vatican's various departments this week, Leo showed himself to be a less pointed boss than Francis. The previous pope was known to accuse the Vatican hierarchy of a narcissistic pathology of power, and to warn that those who spread gossip are really the enemies of peace. In remarks on Monday, Leo, too, acknowledged that certain dynamics linked to the exercise of power, the desire to prevail, or the pursuit of personal interests are slow to change. But he also expressed deep gratitude and said the work of each is important for the whole. Leo buys all of Francis's messages, said Bradford Hinze, a theologian at Fordham University in New York, but he's trying to say it in a way that's more persuasive to the people that he wants to persuade. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. U.S. strikes ISIS in Nigeria after Trump warned of attacks on Christians. The attack comes after President Trump ordered the Defense Department last month to prepare to intervene militarily in Nigeria to protect Christians from Islamic militants. By Helena Cooper, Saiku Jema, and Eric Schmidt. The United States launched a number of strikes against the Islamic State in northwestern Nigeria, President Trump announced on Thursday, the latest American military campaign against a non-state adversary, in this case, Islamic jihadists who the president asserts have been slaughtering Christians. Mr. Trump said in a post on Truth Social that the United States launched a powerful and deadly strike against ISIS terrorist scum in northwest Nigeria who have been targeting and viciously killing primarily innocent Christians at levels not seen for many years and even centuries. The strike involved more than a dozen Tomahawk cruise missiles fired off a Navy ship in the Gulf of Guinea, hitting insurgents in 2 ISIS camps in northwest Nigeria's Sokoto state, according to a U.S. military official who spoke on condition of anonymity to discuss operational matters. The operation was done in coordination with the Nigerian military, the official said. In a statement, U.S. Africa Command said its initial assessment concluded that multiple ISIS terrorists were killed in the strike. U.S. Africa Command is working with our Nigerian and regional partners to increase counterterrorism cooperation efforts related to ongoing violence and threats against innocent lives, General Dagvin Anderson, the commander of U.S. Africa Command, said in a statement. Our goal is to protect Americans and disrupt violent extremist organizations wherever they are. The attack occurred in a region along the border with Niger, where a branch of ISIS called the Islamic State Sahel has been attacking both government forces and civilians, according to Caleb Weiss, a a counterterrorism analyst and editor of FDD's Long War Journal. The U.S. operation inside Africa's most populous nation followed months of growing allegations by Christian evangelical groups and senior Republicans that Christians were being targeted in widespread violence. An insurgency there has gone on for more than a decade, killing thousands of Christians and Muslims across sectarian lines. The Nigerian authorities have rejected allegations of a Christian genocide, noting that the web of violent armed groups with different motives and spread across the country kills as many Muslims as Christians. However, Nigerian officials have stepped up engagement with the U.S. in recent weeks after Mr. Trump ordered the Defense Department in November to prepare to intervene militarily in Nigeria to protect Christians. The Christmas Day attack came after the U.S. had been conducting intelligence-gathering surveillance flights over large parts of Nigeria since late November, according to the military official. On Thursday, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth wrote in a post on social media, "The president was clear last month. The killing of innocent Christians in Nigeria and elsewhere must end. The Department of War is always ready. So ISIS found out tonight, on Christmas," he added. "More to come." Kemebe Ebienfa, the spokesman for Nigeria's Ministry of Foreign Affairs, said in a post that the precision strikes on terrorist targets in Nigeria were carried out in coordination with the Nigerian government. Terrorist violence in any form, whether directed at Christians, Muslims, or other communities, remains an affront to Nigeria's values and to international peace and security, he added. The strikes in Nigeria mark the second time in a week that Mr. Trump has ordered American military retaliation against a branch of the Islamic State. Last week, the United States carried out dozens of airstrikes against the Islamic State in Syria, fulfilling the president's vow to avenge the deaths of 2 Army soldiers and a civilian interpreter killed in a terrorist attack there earlier in the month. U.S. Africa Command, responding to Mr. Trump's orders in November, drew up options for targeting insurgents in Nigeria and forwarded them to the Pentagon and the White House. The options included airstrikes on the few known compounds in northern Nigeria inhabited by militant groups, officials said. Even as the plans were being drawn up, American military officials said it was doubtful they would have much long-term impact because of the entrenched nature of the conflict. The violence in the northwest region where the strikes occurred is driven in large part by armed bandits and gangs kidnapping for ransom. The insurgency is concentrated in the northeast, where jihadist groups like the notorious Boko Haram and its now more powerful splinter, the Islamic State West Africa Province, an affiliate of the Islamic State group, have killed tens of thousands of civilians over the past decade. Nigeria is not officially at war, but more people are killed there than in most war-torn countries. More than 12,000 people were killed by various violent groups this year alone, according to Armed Conflict Location and Event Data, a conflict monitoring group. On Wednesday, a suspected suicide bomber detonated an explosive device during evening prayers in a mosque at a market in Maiduguri, the capital of Borno State, in the northeast of Nigeria. Nigerian government officials said 5 were killed and dozens injured, though local media said at least 12 people were buried on Thursday, citing residents. Mr. Trump, in his Truth Social post, said that under my leadership, our country will not allow radical Islamic terrorism to prosper. He added, "May God bless our military and Merry Christmas to all, including the dead terrorists, of which there will be many more if their slaughter of Christians continues." Honduran candidate claims fraud after Trump-backed opponent is declared victor. After officials called the presidential race for Nasri Asfoura his rival, Salvador Nasrallah disrupted the result and expressed ire over the U.S. role. By Jack Nicas, Emiliano Rodriguez Mega, and Jeff Ernst. Hondurans awoke Christmas Day to the risk of political unrest as a presidential candidate disputed the election results after weeks of vote counting and fraud claims. A day earlier, Honduran election officials declared Nasri Asfoura, a former mayor endorsed by President Trump, as the president-elect of the Central American nation of 10 million. Salvador Nasrallah, a famous sportscaster, game show host, and 4-time presidential candidate, contested that conclusion, claiming that some contested votes from the election held last month had still not been counted, despite days of reviews of disputed tally sheets. In an interview with the New York Times, Mr. Nasrallah, a right-wing politician, appeared torn between fighting for his votes and his fear of empowering the ruling leftist party, Libra, which has called for the election to be annulled entirely. "I'm in a dilemma," he said. "I would like to appeal because almost 2 million people voted for me. But," he said, "I don't want to encourage the communists." At a news conference on Wednesday, Mr. Nasrallah said he would not ask Hondurans to take to the streets, recalling the protests after a contested election in 2017 that turned deadly. Those protesters were supporting Mr. Nasrallah, who had run and lost against Juan Orlando Hernandez, the former Honduran president recently pardoned by Mr. Trump in a U.S. drug case. When Honduran election officials declared Mr. Asfoura the winner on Christmas Eve, they said that a review of more than 98% of the tally sheets showed it was arithmetically impossible for Mr. Nasrallah to prevail. The official tally had Mr. Asfoura winning the three-way race by 27,000 votes, or less than 1 percentage point, with just over 40% of the vote. If Mr. Nasrallah does formally contest the result, he is on a strict clock. Honduran law gives him 3 business days to file an appeal. If he misses that deadline, the results cannot be challenged. Honduras's electoral court, which is made up of 3 magistrates, each aligned with one of the nation's 3 major political parties, has up to 45 days to decide a challenge. But Mr. Asfoura is scheduled to be sworn in as president on January 27th, and a pending challenge would not prevent him from taking office. Earlier this month, the U.S. State Department revoked the visas of one of the court's magistrates, Mario Morazan, who represents the governing Libre Party, claiming that he was undermining democracy in Honduras by impeding the vote count. To have an election annulled, Honduran law requires a candidate to prove widespread or structural fraud that changed the outcome, rather than just isolated errors. Mr. Nasrallah has alleged such fraud, claiming forged documents and altered tally sheets. While his primary legal path lies with the electoral justice system, he could also seek a political solution through Honduras's Congress. It appears unlikely that he will receive any international assistance. Mr. Trump publicly endorsed Mr. Asfoura days before the vote, saying that if the right-wing candidate did not win, the United States will not be throwing good money after bad in Honduras. When early returns showed Mr. Nasrallah in the lead, Mr. Trump quickly suggested fraud without offering any evidence. But when Mr. Asfoura pulled into the lead and was eventually declared the winner after a week-long manual count of many tally sheets, U.S. officials quickly congratulated him and urged the parties to move on, despite the votes disputed by Mr. Nasrallah. Mr. Nasrallah directed his ire at the United States, arguing that by dropping support for him, Washington had condemned Honduras to return to the status of a narco-government under the shadow of former President Hernandez, who he fears will control his opponent's party. The United States has sent Honduras back 15 years, he told the Times. It has put Honduras back at the epicenter of drug trafficking in Latin America. There was briefly a sign that the Organization of American States, the main multilateral regional body, might support a challenge to the results. Its leader, Albert Ramdin, said in an online post at about 3:30 p.m. Honduras time on Wednesday that the group was aware of the difficulties experienced during the electoral process, recognizes the work carried out by Honduran institutions, and regrets that the full recount of the votes cast by citizens has not yet been completed. Minutes later, Secretary of State Marco Rubio posted that all parties should respect the confirmed results and ensure a peaceful transition of authority to President-elect Nasri Asfoura. The U.S. mission to the OAS then followed up with a post congratulating Mr. Asfoura, adding that Hondurans had exercised their right to democratically elect their future leaders. Within 2 hours, the OAS issued a statement that it did not identify any decisive fraudulent elements and considers that the declared results reflect the will expressed by the citizenry. Mr. Ramdin followed up with a post congratulating Mr. Asfoura. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Why Russia is likely to reject the new U.S.-Ukrainian peace plan. The first draft essentially called for Ukraine's surrender. The revised version includes the security guarantees Kyiv wants to prevent future Russian aggression. By Ivan Nechepurenko. On Tuesday, President Volodymyr Zelensky of Ukraine presented a 20-point peace plan formulated by Ukrainian and American officials that was a significant departure from a plan drawn up in October that would have essentially forced Ukraine to cede territory and rule out NATO membership. Mr. Zelensky presented the new proposal as a reasonable compromise to the plan drawn up by Kirill Dmitriev, the special envoy of President Vladimir V. Putin of Russia, and Steve Witkoff, President Trump's special envoy, and unveiled in November. The new blueprint includes the security guarantees Kyiv wants to prevent future Russian aggression, as well as plans to rebuild the war-ravaged nation. But a Kremlin emboldened by Moscow's advances on the battlefield and restrained by the difficulty of selling the new plan to the Russian public as a victory is unlikely to accept it. This is an absolute mockery, Alexei Naumov, an analyst of international affairs based in Moscow, said of the new Ukrainian plan in a post on the Telegram messaging app. The idea is clear. Pitch this to the Americans as a compromise and then blame Russia for its failure. Over the past 2 years, Mr. Putin has consistently insisted on two main points. Ukraine must withdraw its forces from the rest of the Donetsk and Luhansk regions, and NATO membership must be ruled out. Mr. Putin confirmed this position on Friday at his annual news conference. He said that Russia was willing to make some accommodations, widely believed to involve giving up some Russian-occupied land in Ukraine's Kharkiv and Zaporizhia regions. But he stressed that Moscow remained willing to continue fighting to fully occupy the Donetsk region. The Ukrainian peace plan stipulates that Russia must withdraw its forces from the Dnipropetrovsk, Mykolaiv, Sumy, and Kharkiv regions. The proposal also states that Ukraine would pull its troops back from the areas of the Donetsk region that would be turned into a demilitarized zone, but only if Russia withdrew its forces from an equivalent stretch of land. The plan offers no compromise regarding the territories or the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant. Georgy Boft, a Russian analyst, said of the plant that is currently occupied by Russian forces, but that Ukraine would prefer to operate jointly with the United States. Failing to resolve the territorial issue renders this a non-starter. Even though Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine has been costly for both the Russian economy and Moscow's army, the Kremlin appears to still believe it can gain more by fighting. The Russian economy is at its weakest point since 2022, with interest rates at record highs and growth rates dipping toward recession. But despite sanctions imposed by the West, because of the war, analysts say the country is still far removed from the kind of economic crisis that would force the Kremlin to change course. Russia occupies about 3/4 of the Donetsk region. At the current pace of their advance, Moscow's forces would take about 18 months to capture the entire region. Dmitry A. Medvedev, Russia's hawkish security official and a former president, said on Wednesday that about 417,000 recruits signed new contracts to join the Russian army in 2025, a figure largely consistent with estimates by independent researchers. The continued flow of new recruits means that Russia can afford to continue the war despite suffering heavy losses. Russia is interested in negotiating a possible peace deal to maintain a working relationship with Washington and to avoid taking the full blame for the ongoing conflict, experts say. Moscow is also interested in delaying any additional sanctions or other economic restrictions from Washington. Sanctions imposed in October by Mr. Trump on Russia's two oil giants, Rosneft and Lukoil, have forced the country to sell its oil at significantly steeper discounts. The tug-of-war over potential peace terms also deepens the cracks between Ukraine and its Western allies as details are discussed across various capitals in grinding negotiations. On Wednesday, Dmitry S. Peskov, the Kremlin spokesman, said that Mr. Putin had been briefed about the new proposals and that Moscow was forming its position. Our colleagues in the United States are well aware of the main parameters of Russia's position, he said. A spokeswoman for the Russian Foreign Ministry said on Thursday that there had been slow but steady progress in negotiations with the United States. Ukraine signaled that discussions were continuing on the Christmas holiday. Mr. Zelensky said he had discussed substantive details of the ongoing work on Thursday with Mr. Witkoff and Jared Kushner, Mr. Trump's son-in-law. Ukraine's lead negotiator, Rustem Umerov, was to speak with the Americans later in the day, Mr. Zelensky added. We believe this is the right approach, not to lose a single day or a single opportunity that can bring the result closer, Mr. Zelensky said in a post on social media. The diplomatic back and forth over peace terms is likely to continue as the war trudges on, commentators said. Putin has no intention of ending the war against Ukraine, nor is he ready to make even minor compromises at this stage, Volodymyr Fesenko, an analyst based in Kyiv, said in a post on Facebook. For the Kremlin, discussing the Trump peace plan is purely a tactical game played with the U.S. to maintain constructive relations with the current American president, while simultaneously provoking friction and contradictions between the United States and Ukraine. Will Mamdani be the 111th or 112th mayor of New York? It depends. An arcane numbering system and the misplacement of an official record have caused confusion on where Zoran Mamdani falls in history. By Andy Newman. Matthias Nichols did not create this problem. A 17th century New York statesman before New York was a state, Mr. Nichols was a man of many accomplishments. He drafted an early legal code for the colony of New York and served as the Speaker of the Assembly. His great-grandson, William Floyd, signed the Declaration of Independence, making Nichols a founding great-grandfather of our nation. His family owned vast swaths of Long Island. His modern descendants include musical nobility, David Crosby, and political luminaries, former Governor William Weld of Massachusetts. On top of that, in 1671, Mr. Nichols was appointed the 6th mayor of New York. But it turns out that in 1674, he was also appointed the 8th mayor of New York. And this fact has caused a near existential crisis for Zoran Mamdani, the mayor-elect. Will he become New York City's 111th mayor or its 112th? The sources of confusion are numerous, as reported by the news site Gothamist, which brought the whole sordid tale to light. Part of the problem is a numbering convention whereby a mayor who serves 2 non-consecutive terms gets counted twice, just as Donald J. Trump is considered both the 45th and 47th president. Another complicating factor is the misplacement of a historical record called the Minutes of the Mayor's Court, which somehow persisted for more than 3 centuries. Here's what happened. From 1653 to 1665, New Amsterdam, as New York was then known under Dutch rule, was run by a pair of officials called burgomasters. Under English rule, starting in 1665, New York had mayors appointed by the colonial governor. Mr. Nichols, in 1671, was the 6th. John Lawrence, in 1672, was the 7th. But in 1673, the Dutch retook the colony from the English and reinstalled the burgomasters. In the fall of 1674, the English regained control, and on November 10th, Mr. Nichols was sworn in again, this time as New York's 8th mayor. None of this mattered much until the early 20th century, when the city started publishing a numbered list of mayors in the City of New York official directory, better known as the Green Book. The book's compilers missed Mr. Nichols' second term and listed his successor, William Derval, as mayor number 8. The result is that the number of every mayor from Derval onward was off by 1. It took until the 1980s for someone to figure this out. In 1982, a historical editor stumbled upon the missing minutes of the mayor's court for 1674 in the custody of the Manhattan County Clerk, rather than in the office of the city clerk, where most such records reside. In 1989, based on the recently unearthed information, another historian, Peter Christoph, wrote in the record of the New York Genealogical and Biographical Society that then-Mayor Ed Koch was actually New York's 106th, not 105th. It is a mind-boggling thought. 99 mayors misnumbered, most of them gone to the grave, secure on the knowledge of their place in history, but all of them numerically out of whack, he wrote. But no one official paid attention, and the miscount continued through Mayor 110, or 111, Eric Adams. This fall, an amateur historian named Paul Hortenstein flagged the mix-up to reporters. So here we are. Mr. Mamdani, who initially expressed excitement at the prospect of becoming the city's 111th mayor, now says he will be psyched to become the 112th. But of course, nothing is that simple. For one thing, New York has had a handful of acting mayors. Mr. Hortenstein turned up one, William Beekman, a one-time burgomaster no less, who served for over a year in the 1680s and is not even listed in the Green Book. Several other early mayors had also served as burgomasters, so why not count them and acting mayors too? If the Dutch burgomasters were counted in the same way we count mayors serving non-consecutive terms, another 15 would be included, so the mayor-elect might be number 133. Michael Lorenzini, the operations manager for the City Department of Records and Information Services, wrote in a blog post this month. On the other hand, wouldn't it be simpler to just count the number of unique persons who have been mayor? With the current system, Mr. Lorenzini said in an interview, "You're not really counting mayors, you're counting administrations. Not counting acting mayors or burgomasters, Mr. Mamdani would be the 96th occupant of the mayor's seat." Then again, there is a misleading equivalency implied in counting colonial mayors in the same tally as modern mayors. In the old days, the mayor was appointed to run a village of several thousand souls crammed into the bottom few acres of Manhattan. Now the mayor is elected and governs a metropolis of 8.5 million, sprawled across 300 square miles. For this reason, Kenneth Cobb, the Assistant Records Department Commissioner, said on Tuesday, "We would like to put forth the notion that the count should begin in 1898, when New York City was expanded to include the modern 5 boroughs. That would make Mr. Mamdani mayor number 21. But who's counting?" You've been listening to a reading of articles and features from the Friday, December 26th issue of the New York Times. Your reader has been Chris Wilhelm. Thank you for listening.